Welcome to Parshat Miketz. I have to admit that I was tempted to stick with Yaakov again this week, and I said no. I said I was moving on. I'm moving on. I think there's something I've been reflecting that there's something very dynamic about Yaakov. He gets the most screen time in the Sefer Breshit of all the forefathers. Avraham is pretty close. But there's something very dramatic, I think, about Yaakov, in the way he dresses up, right? In the way he gets so angry about Leah and Lavan, in his sadness at Alon Bachut, right? Like, I just think there are a lot of strong emotions, and he has more strong emotions in this week's parsha. But we're going to leave him be this week, and we're going to turn to Yosef. And I think that Yosef, like many of our ancestors, carries a lot of baggage and a lot of trauma from his life experience. And the things that when I was looking through some of the Midrashim, what I noticed was that there was both this understanding that Yosef might want to forget the trauma of his family, and also that he might actually want to remember. So I wanted to explore that tension. So I'm going to share my screen here. And the other thing that maybe I would say before we get started is that I didn't find as much on Yosef as I wanted to. And I wonder if part of that is because Yosef is kind of a scary character, I think, for Chazal. And I think it's especially noteworthy in this week's Parsha when we read it on Hanukkah. Yosef is like the poster child for successful assimilation, right? He doesn't choose to be exiled from his family and from Israel. But once he's in Egypt and he has the chance, he's able very successfully to change his name, to change his dress, to change his facial sort of configuration, right? He is literally unrecognizable to his brothers. And I could see why that would be sort of scary. And so I think that sort of weaves in here a little bit as well. So one of the things that we learn about Yosef, right? So Yosef is, we open the scene 2 years after he's been sort of languishing in prison because the wine server has forgotten about him. Right? He had successfully interpreted 2 dreams at the end of last week's parsha, and he says, "Please remember me and mention me to Paro." That he forgets, but then when Paro has dreams, Yosef is pulled out of jail. Right? He successfully interprets Paro's dreams. He's given this new name and new position and new everything in Egypt. And when he has his first child, we see that there's like a very intentional parting of ways for Yosef. V'yikra Yosef et Shem HaBachor Menashe. He calls his older son Menashe. Ki nasani Nashani Elohim et kol amali et kol beit avi. Because God has made me forget completely all of my toils. That makes sense, right? That we'd want to leave behind our amalenu, right? Our toils, but also that he would forget kol beit avi. And I think that there's a moment of pause there, because Yaakov loved Yosef and treated him well. And also, what does Beit Avi really encompass, right? Is it just the home of Yaakov and his brothers who were horrible to him? Or is there something deeper? Is he like forgetting his Jewishness, whatever that sort of means for a forefather? And in fact, Breshit Rabbah says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Shalem b'Talmudo, referring to Yaakov, that Yaakov retains all his learning, aval Yosef shachach, that Yosef forgets his learning. He sort of purposefully empties his mind of it, right? And we talk about on Hanukkah, right, about how the Greeks tried to force us to lose our Torah knowledge. And here Yosef is just sort of giving it away, just letting it go. And so I think that there's like a little bit of judgment maybe here, that Yosef is choosing to let go, to forget. Maybe because it's painful, which is totally understandable, but also he's what's that old phrase, right? He's losing the baby with the bathwater, in that way. But then I found another interesting sort of second approach to this, which is to say that when you start something new, it's very difficult if you keep the old at the same time. And so Rabbeinu Bechaya talks about how Chazal refers to the in-laws' house, like right. And traditionally, the translation is very gender neutralized, maybe I should say. Right. But in the Hebrew, it's when a woman joins the house of her husband, she has to forget. They call the Beit Naso, the wedding house or the marriage house, Kilomar Beit HaShichacha, a house of forgetting. And so too, right, when a man leaves his family, he clings to his wife. So too that, right, like that he sort of leaves behind his parents. And he gets this, he sort of picks this up based on Yosef's naming his son Menashe, saying that once Yosef took a wife and had children of his own, he had to sort of turn his back on his old life in order to be successful in his new life. And I don't know, I'm curious how that sort of resonates for other people. I love family traditions, and I felt no worry about bringing them along into my new marriage house. And some of them Will really loves and we kept doing, and some of them he doesn't like so much. And so we don't do them as often, or sometimes we do and he sort of grumbles through them. But the idea that you have to just forget, I think is very painful. And I think that it extends to lots of different areas where we say it's like better to forget things. Where I think the community is sort of coming around to say that we can honor people's pasts and respect them while honoring their choices in the future. And so I didn't love the forgetting piece of Yosef, but again, I'll pause for a second in case anyone feels differently about him. Okay, so I kept digging. I wasn't even planning to bring this. I was like, I don't know, I don't really like this. But then I found this beautiful midrash about remembering. And I thought, how interesting is it that Breshit Rabbah, the midrash sort of body in general, I think the version I bring you is from Midrash Tanchuma, but that they can hold both, that Yosef is someone who wants to forget and forgets things, but he also seems to have this really strong desire to remember. And I think that we see that tension in these two psukim that the Midrash is commenting on, because there's a contronym here. Any language buffs know what a contronym is? Ooh, I've managed to stump everyone. A contronym is when one word might mean two different things. So the definition and like its opposite. To dust means to remove dust from something, but to dust with sugar means to add dust to the cake, right? Or to leave it here means to make it remain, but for you to leave means that you will exit, right? There are more that are better on the spot. I'm forgetting them. We'll think of more of them. If anyone can think of a good one, let me know. So the one here is tricky to find because of the way Hebrew works, but it comes from the shoresh nun kaf resh, which normally means to recognize. So vayar Yosef et achav vayakrem. Right. So Yosef sees his brothers and he recognizes them. Vayit naker, same shoresh, different conjugation, but he acted like a stranger, alehem, towards them, right? So Yosef recognizes his brothers, and then in the same shoresh chooses to be like a stranger towards them, to be unrecognizable, you might say. And I think that maybe the Torah uses that same word back to back to mean two different things to highlight Yosef's total uncertainty. Do I want to be recognized? Do I not want to be recognized? Right? There's such a hesitancy for him in that moment. So I want to look at the Midrash has this amazing understanding of what was happening in the background of the story. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Simon, Af Yosef Yodea Hayash Achav Yordin Lemitraim Lishbor Ochel. Right, Rabbi Yehuda, the son of Simon, says that Yosef was aware that his brothers were descending to Egypt to obtain corn. And I think the pshat of the midrash, if you could say such a thing, is that once the famine started and Yosef started the storage houses, he understood that everyone from Canaan was going to come down to Egypt, and so surely his brothers would be among that list. I saw a beautiful drash on this midrash from Aviva Richmond, who's a teacher at the Hadar Institute in New York, who said maybe this was Yosef's goal all along. right? Yosef gets hauled out of prison. He hears Paro's dream. He understands that Paro needs a solution to his problem, right? He sort of correctly understands the dream, both with Ruach HaKodesh and also like some understanding probably of context and of Paro. And he realizes that to be a successful dream interpreter, he has to be a dream activator also, right? And so he decides to set up these storehouses, and that's how he becomes in charge. And what Aviva Richmond suggests is that that whole time, Yosef had his sort of top objective, which was to help secure himself in Egyptian society and keep the Egyptian society going, but also that already the wheels were turning. Oh, if I get Egypt to be the place where everyone has to go for grain, maybe my brothers will have to come down here, right? And there's this like such a strong remembering there, right? Such a strong desire to see his brothers on some level. And not only does he think that they might come, but he concocts this really time-intensive plan to find them. So Ma'asa, Hoshiv Shomrim al Kol Petachim, he puts guards at every entrance, right? Border control. Va'amar lahem, and he says to them, Ru'u kol mi shenichnas lishbor ochel. Everyone who comes into Egypt to take food, to buy food, to purchase food, kitvu shmo b'shem aviv, right? Write down his name and his father's name. La'erev heviu b'takim v'asukach. And at night, bring me those lists. And that's what they did. And so to me, there is something very moving about picturing Yosef sitting in his room, reading through hundreds of names, searching for his brothers, right? Like this was probably the only way to do it at a time where, quill and paper were your only, or papyrus were your only options, but just the effort that went into finding his brothers' names was monumental. And there's something like almost childlike about it to me, that he's willing to pore over each list every night. And he's a really important person. Surely he has other better things to do. But we don't, but that's sort of how I picture the scene. כיוון שבאו בני יעקב, כל אחד ואחד נכנס בשער שלו וכתבו את שמותם, לערב הביאו לו הפתקים, זה קורא Reuven ben Yaakov, ואחד קורא Shimon ben Yaakov, ואחד Levi. Right? And so finally, right, when the brothers come to the city, the guards write down their names, and at night they bring them the lists, right? I would have envisioned he would have said, keep watch for these names. But instead he does that sort of like, I would call it almost like heart labor of finding the names himself, right? They bring him the lists and he finds, Reuven ben Yaakov, Shimon ben Yaakov, right? He sees his brothers' names. Thereupon, miyad, immediately, right? Yosef says, Sitmu eta otzarot v'pitchu otzar echad. Right? He wants to force the brothers, Egypt is a big place, he wants to force the brothers to go to one storehouse because he wants to be there when they get there, right? So again, sort of enormous turmoil to the city, right? Like there has to be some kind of cost to closing all of the storehouses but one, but he forces everyone into a funnel to get to his storehouse. And he gives the storehouse commander, the official in charge, the Baal HaOtzar, all of their names. And he says, Re'eh k'sheyashvu ha'anashim elu liadcha tfos otam v'sager otam lefanai. So I want to remember, right, that this is not all like love, right? He says, capture them, right? Seize them for me. And bring them to me, because he wants, again, to have this carefully orchestrated meeting. So if the story ended here, right, that the brothers eventually made it to that storehouse, I would say like, wow, this is an interesting tension for Yosef between remembering and forgetting, and how hopeful I am that, there's a strong remembering urge here. But the Midrash ends with this really amazing twist. Like I love, like beach read mysteries. And like, to me, this has that feel here. Because after 3 days, the amount of time that I guess Yosef assumes it will take them to get from the border to the storehouse, they have not yet appeared. And so Yosef sends out Shiv'im Giborim, 70 of the strongest, most powerful men from the king's guard, to find them. And he goes to the marketplace to find them, which is notable in the story. And they go, they find them in the harlots' Shuk, the red light district of Egypt. Umativan Bashuk shel Zonot. Why did they go there, right? Chas v'shalom, we should ever imagine the brothers stopped for like some fun on the way, right? They didn't go to the red light district. Why are they there? Ela amru achinu Yosef yefei to'ar v'yefei mar'eh shema bekubahu. So our brother is extremely well built and handsome. Perhaps he's in a brothel. And I took out this asterisk, which said, like, chas v'shalom, you should think that Yosef went for his own fun. The brothers are assuming that he was sold as a sex slave, basically, right? Our brother was very pretty. He must have been sold as a sex slave. Let's go find him there. And so to me, there is like this incredible, like almost like a missed connection. I don't know if anyone else ever reads those. I see Elizabeth at least nodding that she knows what they are. Sometimes, like if you sit on the train next to someone and you hit it off and you want to get her number and you write it down on your palm and then it's wet outside and the rain sort of washes it away. There are places like the New York Times sometimes runs them or Craigslist runs them where you write, sat next to a pretty girl in a green coat and like would have loved to take her for a drink. I didn't mean to not call you. I just don't have your number anymore. Right. And that girl might write, sat next to this guy. I thought we really had a good connection. Somehow he never called me. Like, here's my email if you want to reach me, right? And people find each other through these misconnections. And so to me, there is like almost a missed connection here, right? Yosef thinks that his brothers are not looking for him, but in fact, his brothers are looking for him too, right? And so there, I think there might almost be, and this is my own thought and definitely could be wrong. I don't want to say this shame Aviva Richmond, but perhaps there's also a thought of the brothers from long ago where they're like, God, we really made a bad choice, right? we panicked and we sold Yosef into slavery and we told our dad he's dead, so we can't like really do anything about it. But what if he's suffering somewhere? And so as soon as there's a famine, they're like, hey, let's go to Egypt to get food, right? That's their cover. That's their top story that they can tell to their father because they can't tell their father that they're looking for Yosef because he thinks Yosef is dead, right? But their understory is like, maybe we could finally make things right. Maybe we could find, right? Presumably they're not going to the red light district to like mock Yosef as he works his trade. They're going to find him and rescue him, right? And so I think there's something incredibly powerful about this meeting. And like, I almost wish that Yosef had gone to the market to find them himself, because that would have been such an amazing reunion. Like, you're looking for me, I was looking for you. And I think that the reason that Yosef sends them to the marketplace maybe is because that's where people sort of get delayed, but maybe he had this hope, right? Maybe my brothers are looking for me. Maybe they'll go look in like the human trade before they come to the Otsar to get the grains. And all of that being said, of course, right then, Vitafsu Otan, right? They don't have any autonomy here. The guards seize them. They bring them to Yosef. And Yosef decides to be Vayit Naker instead of Vayakir. He decides to be unrecognizable instead of recognizable at that moment of reunion. And probably for very good reason, right? I was talking about this with someone else this week, and they said, well, yeah, I like when everyone is happy and nice, and I don't like when family fights, and so I just want them to all make up right away. But like, of course, the brothers did something horrible and traumatizing and like long lasting to Yosef, and his life was not all being the vizier of Egypt as a result. And so, I think he chooses to take the time to make sure that this would be a good idea to reveal who he is. But I have to believe, maybe not everyone does, but I would like to believe that the Midrash is imagining that Yosef got the idea to at least start the test because he saw his brothers at the market looking for him. Because even when we say we want to forget things, we want to be remembered, right? And we want to hold on to the memories that are valuable to us. And so I think what I took from this parsha and from this collection of midrashim was the idea that hopefully none of us should ever have to survive a trauma such as Yosef's, but that at any sort of point in the road, at any point like Rabbeinu Bachai is talking about, where you sort of move on, you have to decide like what comes in your memory box and what gets left behind, and that those are very hard choices, and that sometimes things have to shift over time, right? It's not as simple as like, Will has one small moving box that he's allowed to move from house to house and never opened. And it has like a lot of sort of childhood memorabilia. Like that's fixed, right? He can't change his mind and go back and get something he gave away. But when you're talking about sort of emotions and feelings, sometimes those things are in flux. And so I think Yosef actually, even though he comes across as harsh, right? And he even speaks harshly to his brothers via the Itam Kashot, I think that he actually does a very graceful dance of the forgetting and remembering. And so I felt inspired by that choice that he makes. And I think that this parsha is also it is the dance. It's the middle. It's not the end, right? We come from a long break, the 2-year intermission of Yosef in jail, and we don't get to see the ultimate reunion until next week's parsha. And so this is a time where Yosef is really trying to figure things out, and I think he does it in a really interesting way. So I definitely welcome other people's thoughts, ideas. I just talked for a really long time. Yeah. Stunned you all into silence with my mastery of this topic, I can tell.
Well, the one thing that I was thinking about is how dreams are sort of the things that are both hidden to you and revealed to you. And, so much of this parsha is about Yosef and dreams and all that. Like that's so much about who he is. And this idea of the things that, you forget dreams but they're still there and you can bring them back. And it's sort of a version of memory, a very odd, like a different mental state, but a version of memory. So
oh, I like that. A dream interpreter is like a master balancer between forgetting and remembering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Sometimes you wake up sort of sad if you dreamed about someone that you had not forgotten, but right, like, you're remembering. And sometimes you wish you hadn't dreamed that dream, and sometimes you're sort of comforted by it, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's always interesting to me, like if he, right, he named his son Menashe. Had he named his son Yaakov, right? Like then what would that have been? Like what kind of remembering, right? Or if he'd had like some favorite thing from it doesn't happen as much like border crossings, but like sometimes when I like eat a certain food, I dream about someone that I used to eat that food with, right? Or like my grandma used to make pierogi. When we make pierogi, sometimes I dream of her, right? And so like what might have set him off on remembering or forgetting, and like how I almost feel like the Menashe thing is like he was like so loudly screaming, "I'm forgetting," when like how could you forget, right? Maybe he named him after having like a dream of home. Yeah, I love that tie into the dreams. That's beautiful. Cool. Well, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and that you stay warm wherever you are this Shabbat. It is promising to be quite chilly. And I will be here next week. It is winter break for small people, but probably not normal sized people. So the schedule will continue as normal, and I look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.